In this video, I will show you how to perform CRUD operations using ASP.NET Core MVC, SQL Server, and Entity Framework. So I will show you how to create, read, update, and delete invoices. Then in the next video, I will show you how to implement the search functionality and the pagination functionality using a JavaScript library. So here we can see that we can switch between the different pages. Also, I will show you how to display an alert before deleting the invoice. So when we click on the delete button, we obtain this alert. Then I will show you how to create invoices with multiple items. So I will show you how to use the one-to-many relationship of Entity Framework. So here when we create a new invoice, we can add multiple services. And of course, we can delete services. So we can add services to the new invoice and we can update the services of an existing invoice. So if we go back to the list of invoices, we can update the invoice. So we can click on this edit button. And here we can see that we have these two items and we can create more services. You can find the link of the second video in the description. First, let's create a new project. Then let's select C# and Web, then let's scroll down. And let's select ASP.NET Core Web App with MVC. Then next. Let's call the project Invoice MVC. Then next. Let's select .NET 9, then create. So we obtain this project. Now we need to create a new database. So let's click on Server Explorer. Then let's create a new connection. Then let's provide the server name. So it is ./SQL Express. Then we need to trust the server certificate. Then here we need to provide the name of the database. So I will create a new database and we can call it DB30 for example. Let's click on OK. So this database does not exist and we need to create it. So let's click on Yes. And we obtain this database. So let's expand tables. And for the moment, we don't have any table. Now we need the connection string. So we can make a right click on this connection, then properties. And let's copy the connection string. And let's save it into our project. So we need to go to appsettings.json. And let's create a new key. We need to collate connection strings. Then let's create the first connection string. So here we can create a new key. We can call it default connection, for example. And let's paste the connection string. So here we need to remove the spaces from trust server certificate. Then we need to install some packages that allow us to connect to the SQL Server using Entity Framework. So let's go to our solution. Let's make a right click on this project. Then Manage NuGet Packages. Then let's go to Browse. And here let's type EF SQL Server. Let's select this package and let's install it. Then we need to install the package Entity Framework Tools. So here let's write EF Tools. Then let's select this package. So this package allows us to use these commands on the Package Manager console. So we need to install it. Now let's close this page. And let's create the ApplicationDbContext that allows us to connect to the database using Entity Framework. So we need to create a new service. So first let's create a new folder. And let's call it services. Then let's create a new class. And let's call it ApplicationDbContext. Then we need to extend the DbContext class of Entity Framework. Let's add the package. Then we need to create the constructor, so we can use this helper. And let's create the constructor that requires the options parameter. Now we need to add the ApplicationDbContext to the service container. So let's go to program.cs and let's add the ApplicationDbContext to the service container. So just here we can write builder.services.addDbContext. So we will add a dbContext of type ApplicationDbContext. Then we need to configure this ApplicationDbContext to connect to the SQL Server using the connection string that we have just here. So here we can provide an arrow function. It requires a parameter, we can call it options. Then we need to read the connection string from appsettings.json. So let's create a variable and we can call it connection string. So we can call builder.configuration.getConnectionString. So it requires a parameter which is the name of the connection string that we have in appsettings.json. So in our case, this is the name that we need. Let's paste it here. Then we need to configure the ApplicationDbContext to connect to the SQL Server. So we can call options.useSQLServer. And of course, we need to provide this method with the connection string. Now we need to create an entity model that allows us to create a table in the database. So in our case, we will perform CRUD operations on invoices. So we need to create a new entity model and we can call it invoice. So let's create a new class in the models folder. And let's call it invoice. Then let's add the different properties of this model. So we need the invoice ID, so it will be the primary key of the invoice in the invoices table. We need the invoice number, the status, the issue date, the due date. So here we can see that they are of type datetime that can be null. So the issue date and the due date are optional. Then we have the service details. So we have the service, we have the unit price. So we need this attribute because it allows us to define the precision of the decimal in the database. Then we have the quantity, we have the client name, the email address of the client, the phone number, and the address. Then let's create a new property in ApplicationDbContext that allows us to create a table using this model. So let's go to ApplicationDbContext and let's create a new property of type dbSet. So it is of type dbSet of the entity model that we created, which is invoice. And we can call it invoices, which will be the name of the table in the database. So here we can see that we have this warning. To get rid of it, we can say that this property will not be null. So here we can write is equal to null exclamation mark. Now we need to create a new migration file that allows us to create the invoices table in the database. So let's save all the files. Then we need to go to Package Manager console. So we can open it either from here, or also we can go to Tools, then NuGet Package Manager, then Package Manager console. So let's create a new migration file. So we can use the command add migration. And let's call the migration file first migration, for example. So this is the migration file that allows us to create the invoices table in the database. And of course, we will create a table with these columns. Now let's create the table in the database. So we can use update database. So now the table is created successfully. Let's take a look at the database. So we can see that tables is always empty. So we can make a right click, then a refresh. And now we can see that we have the invoices table. Let's expand it. And we obtain these columns. Now let's fill this table with some data. So we can make a right click on the table or on the connection. So we can make a right click here, then new query. Then let's write the SQL query that allows us to fill the table. So we can use this query. It allows us to fill the invoices table with some data. Let's click on this Run button, and you can see that 42 rows have been added. Now let's see the data of this table, so we can make a right click, then Show Table Data. And we obtain these rows. Now I will show you how to display these invoices in the application. So we need to create a new controller. So let's go to the controllers folder and let's create a new controller. Let's select MVC controller empty and let's call it Invoices controller. Then we need to create the constructor that allows us to request the ApplicationDbContext from the service container. Then let's save this ApplicationDbContext into a field, so we can use this button, then create and assign field context. So we obtain this context that is initialized just here. Then in the index method, we can read the invoices from the database. So just here, let's create a variable, we can call it invoices. It is equal to context, which is our ApplicationDbContext, dot invoices dot toList. And to display the newest invoices first, just here we can add dot order by descending. And we will sort the invoices by descending order of ID. So if we put the cursor here, we can see that invoices is a list of invoice objects. So now we need to pass this list to the view. So we can pass it as a parameter to the view. Now let's create the view. So the view should be called index as the name of this action method. So we can make a right click, then add view. Let's select razor view empty, then add. And let's call it index.cshtml, then add. So we can delete this command. And then let's define the type of the model. So here, as I said, the model is of type list of invoice objects. So here we can write @model, and it is a list of invoice objects. So here we can see that we have these brackets that allow us to write some C# code. And in our case, we don't need it, so we can delete it. Then let's display the title of the page. So we need to write some HTML code. So we can write the title list of invoices, and also we need to display it in the center of the page. So we can add a bootstrap class, which is text center. Then let's create a button that allows us to create new invoices. So we can create the button new invoice. So it is a link that uses the bootstrap class button. And here we have the URL, so it is the name of the controller / the name of the action method. So later we need to create a method called create in the invoices controller. So here we can use either a href, or we can use tag helpers that allow us to obtain the same URL. So here I will delete this href, and I will replace it with these tag helpers, ASP controller that allows us to provide the name of the controller, and ASP action that allows us to define and to set the name of the action method. Then let's create a table that allows us to display the invoices. So we can create this table, which is a bootstrap table. In the table head, we have these columns. So we will display the invoice ID, the invoice number, the status, the client name, the total price, the issue date, the due date, and we have the action column. So in this column, we will display two buttons. The edit button that allows us to update the invoice details, and the delete button. And then we have the table body. So for the moment, the table body is empty, and we need to fill it using the data of the model. So here we need to write some C# code, and we need to use for each. So because it is a C# code, we need to start with @. So for each invoice that we have in the model, which is a list of invoices, so if we put the cursor here, we can see that this property, which is called model, is a list of invoice. And we already defined the type of the model just here. So for every invoice that we have in the model, we need first to calculate the total price. Then we need to display the invoice ID, so this is C#, that's why we need to start with @ Then we need to display the invoice number, the status, the client name. We need to display the total price, so because we need to add the unit, we will use the explicit razor syntax. This means that we will display the variable between parentheses. Then we will display the issue date, so the issue date is optional and can be null. So if it is not null, we will display the date. Otherwise, we will not display the date. We will do the same thing with the due date. Then here we have the last column. So in the last cell, we will display the edit button and the delete button. So when we click on edit, we will go to the invoices controller and the edit action, and we will add the ID of the invoice in the URL. So the name that we provide here will be the name of the parameter that we will add to the URL. And in our case, it is the invoice ID. Then we have the delete button. So for the delete button, we will send a request to the invoices controller and the delete action. And of course, we will add the ID of the invoice. So for the moment, we don't have the edit action and the delete action in the invoices controller. And later, we need to create them. Now let's add a link in the navbar that allows us to go to the list of invoices. So we need to go to the views folder, then the shared folder, and let's open the layout file. So this layout file will be used by the different pages of the application. Here we have the head, then we have the title that will be displayed in the browser. So here we can delete this. And we can display the title Invoice Manager, for example. So this title will be displayed in the window. Then here we have the header, and then we have the navbar. So in the navbar, we will also display the name of the application. So we can change it here as well. So we can write Invoice Manager. Then we have two items. So this is the first item. It is the home item. And this is the second item, which is the privacy item. So we need to create a new item. So we can copy this. And let's paste it here. So here we can write invoices. So the controller will be the invoices controller. And the method is the index method. Then here we have this main element that will contain the content of the different pages. So what we already created in the index page will be displayed inside this main element. Now let's run the application. So we obtain this application, and here we have the invoices item. But here we can see that in the navbar we don't have a space at the left. So to fix this, we need to go back to the editor. Let's go back to the layout file. Then let's update the nav element. So in this div, we can see that we are using container fluid. Let's delete fluid. Then let's restart the application. And this time we can see that we have some space at the left. Let's click on invoices. And here we can see that we have the list of all the invoices that we have in the database. Now I will show you how to create invoices. So first let's create a new model that allows us to submit the data from the browser to the application. So this will be called a DTO model or a data transfer object model. So let's go to the solution, then let's create a new class in the models folder. And let's call it InvoiceDto. So this model will be very similar to the invoice model. So we need all the properties except the ID that will not be defined by the user. So we can copy all of these properties. And let's paste them here. Then let's delete the precision attribute because it will be used by the database. So let's delete it from here and from here as well. Then let's add validation annotations that allow us to validate the submitted data. So the number property is required. So we need to decorate it with the required attribute. And let's do the same thing with the other properties. So the states is required. The service is required, the same for the unit price, the quantity, the client name, the email address, and the phone number. And you can suppose that the address is optional, so we can declare it as a string that can be null. And of course, we can delete this. So the email address should have the email address format, so we can decorate it also with the email address attribute. And the phone number should have the phone number format, so let's add phone. So because the unit price is composed by two words, if we have a validation error with the unit price, we can display the unit price as two words. So just here, we can add the display attribute. Then let's define the name property. And you can display the name of this property as unit price with two words. So here, let's add a space. And let's do the same thing with the client name. So let's add display. Now let's create the form and let's bind this model to the form. So first let's create a new action method in Invoices controller. So if we go to the index page, we can see that when we click on new invoice, we will go to the Invoices controller and we will execute the create method. So we need to create a new action method called create. So let's go to Invoices controller and let's create a new action method. So it is called create and it will return the view. Now let's create the view. So we can make a right click, then add view. Let's select razor view empty, then add, and let's call it create.cshtml. Let's delete the command, and let's define the type of the model that we will bind to the form. And it is of type InvoiceDto. So here let's add @model InvoiceDto. We can delete the brackets. Then let's display the title of the page, so we can display the text new invoice. Then let's create the form. So this form will be submitted using the post method. So in this form we can create a row with two columns. So this is a bootstrap row. This is the first column. For the moment it is empty, and this is the second column. So in the first column we can display a card. So we can create this card. So it is a bootstrap card that will take the full height of the column. In the card header, we will display the text invoice details, and then in the card body, we need to create some fields. Then we need to create another card in the second column. So we can copy this card and let's paste it here. So for the card header, we can display the line details. Now let's fill the body of the first card. So we can create this row, and we can create a label with the text invoice number, and we can create this div that contains an input field that will be used to provide the invoice number. Also, we have this span that will display any validation error, and the validation error will be displayed using the red color. So now we need to associate the input field and the span to the property of InvoiceDto, which is the number property. So for the input field, we can use a tag helper. It is called ASP4, and it is equal to the name of the property of the model. So it is number. And to bind the same property to the span, we can use another tag helper, which is called ASP validation4. So the property is number. Then let's create another row that allows us to select the payment states. So just here, we can create another row. In the label, we can write payment states. Then we need to create this select element. So we will associate the select element to the states property of the model, which is this property. So the states can be either pending or paid. These are the values that will be displayed to the user, and these are the values that will be submitted to the server. And here we have a span to display any validation error related to the states. Then let's create another row for the issue date and another row for the due date. So these are all the fields that we need for the invoice details. Then let's complete the card of the client details. So we need to create this row. In the label we have the text client, and then we have the input field that is associated to the client name property, and we have this span for the validation errors. Then we have this row. So in the label we have email. The input field is associated to the email property, and we have a span for the validation errors. Then we have this row for the phone number and this row for the address. Then after the row, let's create a new card. So we can create this card. In the header, we can display the service details. Then in the body, we need to display the fields that allow us to provide the service details. So we can create this row with 3 columns. In the first column, we have a label with the text service that allow us to provide the service name. Then we have this column for the unit price, and we have this column for the quantity. Then we need to create the submit button. So after the last card, we can create 2 buttons. So this is the submit button that allows us to submit the form. And here we have the cancel button that allows us to go back to the list of invoices. Let's run the application. Let's click on new invoice. And we obtain this page. So this is the first card, this is the second one, and this is the last card for the service details. So if we click on cancel, we have the list of the invoices. And if we click on submit, for the moment nothing happens because we did not create the action that will handle the submitted data. So now let's create a new action in the invoices controller. So let's go to Invoices Controller and let's create a new action that will receive the submitted data. So it should be called create. So we can copy this method and let's paste it here. And of course, this method will be accessible using the HTTP post method. So we need to decorate it with the HTTP post attribute. So this method requires the submitted data which is available into a model of type InvoiceDto. So we need to add InvoiceDto as a parameter to this method. First, let's check if the submitted data is valid or not. So just here, we can add an if condition. So if the model state is not valid, then we will return the view. Otherwise, we need to create a new invoice. So we can create this object of type invoice and we can set the number, the status, the issue date, due date, and the other properties using the submitted data of InvoiceDto. Then we need to save the invoice in the database. So we can call context.invoices and we will add the new invoice that we created just here. And of course, we need to save the modifications. Then after creating the new invoice, we can redirect the user to the list of invoices. So we can delete this. And let's replace it with return redirect to action. And this is the name of the action of the same controller. So we will redirect the user to the list of invoices. Let's test the application. Let's click on new invoice. And let's submit the form. So now we have validation errors. So the number field is required and we have the same error message with the other fields. Now let's fill the form correctly. Then submit. So this time the invoice is created correctly and we are redirected to the list of invoices. Now I will show you how to update the invoice details. So if we go to the index page, we can see that when we click on the edit button, we will go to the invoices controller and the edit action, and we will provide the edit method with the ID of the invoice. So the value that we have here is the name of the parameter that we need to read in the edit method. So now let's create the edit method in the invoices controller. So let's go to invoices controller and let's create a new action method. So this method will read the invoice ID from the URL. Then let's read the invoice with this ID from the database. So here let's create a new variable. We can call it invoice. So we will read the invoice using our ApplicationDbContext. So we can write context dot to the name of the table, which is invoices, dot we can use find. So find requires the value of the primary key. And in our case, we need to find the invoice by ID. Then let's check if we found the invoice or not. So if invoice is null, we will redirect the user to the list of invoices. Otherwise, we need to create an object of type InvoiceDto using the data of this invoice. So we need InvoiceDto because we will associate it to the form of the edit page. So we can create this InvoiceDto and we need to pass it to the view. So just here we can write InvoiceDto. Then let's create the view. So we can make a right click, then add view. So let's select reserve view empty, then add, and let's call it edit as the name of the method. So the edit page will be very similar to the create page. So let's go to the create page. Let's copy all the code. Let's delete this code and let's paste the source code. Let's update the title. So here we can write edit invoice. Then in the invoice details card, we can display the invoice ID. So here in the card body, we can create a new field. So we can copy this div and let's paste it here. So here we can write invoice ID. And we don't need the span, so let's delete it. So this input field, we will not associate it to any property, so we can delete this tag helper. And we need it to be of type read only. Then let's change the bootstrap class. So here let's add plain text. And then we need to display the invoice ID, but we don't have the invoice ID in the model of type InvoiceDto. So we can add the invoice ID to view bag. So let's go back to invoices controller. And here we can add the invoice ID to view bag. So we can create a new property in view bag and we can call it invoice ID and it is equal to the ID of the invoice. Then we can use this property to display the invoice ID in the page. So here we have invoice ID, then we have this input field. So just here we can add the value attribute and it is equal to at, then viewbag.invoiceID. Let's run the application. Then let's see the details of this invoice with the ID 43. So when we click on edit, we obtain this page. So here we can see that the ID is available in the URL. And also here we have this field which is equal to the ID of the invoice. So when we click on submit, nothing happens. So now we need to create another method in the invoices controller that will handle the submitted data of this page. So let's go to invoices controller and let's create a new method called edit. So just here. So this method should be accessible using the post method. So we need to decorate it with the HTTP post attribute. And it should read the ID of the invoice from the URL. So let's add the first parameter, which is called ID. And also we need to read the submitted data, which is of type InvoiceDto. Then let's read the invoice from the database based on this ID. So we can create this variable. It is equal to context.invoices.find, and this is the invoice ID. If we don't find the invoice, we will redirect the user to the list of invoices. Otherwise, we need to validate the submitted data of InvoiceDto. So if the submitted data is not valid, then we will display the view with the validation errors. Otherwise, we need to update the invoice in the database. So we will update all the details of the invoice that we obtained here from the database using the submitted data of InvoiceDto. Then, of course, we need to save the modifications, and we can redirect the user to the list of invoices. So we can delete this. And let's replace it with redirect to action, and this is the name of the action that will display the list of the invoices. Let's run the application. Let's update this invoice. So let's click on Edit. So if we remove the client name, then Submit, we obtain the validation error. So let's set the client name and let's update the due date, for example. Then let's update the quantity. Then Submit. So here we can see that the total price is updated and we have the due date. Now I will show you how to delete invoices. So if we go to the index page, we can see that when we click on the delete button, we will send a request to the invoices controller and the delete method. And we will provide the delete method with the ID of the invoice. So now let's create this method. So let's go to invoices controller. And let's create the delete method that requires the invoice ID from the URL. So first we will read the invoice having this ID. If the invoice is not null, then we need to delete it. So we can call context.invoices.remove, and this is the invoice that we will delete. Then we need to save the modifications, and finally we will redirect the user to the list of the invoices. Let's run the application. Then let's delete the invoice with the ID 40. So here we can see that the invoice with the ID 40 has been deleted and we are redirected to the list of invoices. In the next video, I will show you how to implement the pagination and the search functionality using a JavaScript library. And I will show you how to display an alert before deleting the invoice. Also, I will show you how to create invoices with multiple items. So I will show you how to use the one-to-many relationship of Entity Framework. You can find the link of the next video in the description.